Okay, in this video I'm going to take you through how to calculate time differences. So our essential questions today, we're going to look at what is the time difference between two locations on the Earth given the two time zones for those two locations. And the second thing we're going to look at, once we know how to work out the time difference, we're going to use that to work out what's the local time in one location given that we know the time in a second location. Why would that be really important for us to work out? Well, let's just imagine we're living in Australia and we've had a good friend who's moved over to London, over to England. It's their 18th birthday and we want to know what time we should ring them. We could just get up at 11 o'clock in the morning in Australia and give them a ring, and we would think, oh, yeah, maybe it'd be 11 o'clock over there, but obviously there's a time difference. What time should I ring them in Australia so that I don't wake them up from just in case they're in bed? But more importantly, probably, what time should I ring them in Australia so that it's probably a nice reasonable time, maybe 8 or 9 in the morning over in London? So we'll be able to do that by the end of this and through as we work through a couple of examples. So first thing to do, the time difference between two locations. You can see on the screen a map of the world. It's broken down into the different time zones with the different colors there. Most of those time zones are two vertical straight lines, which are the lines of longitude. You'll notice that some of the time zones, though, go around a few little corners, and that's because there's the effort to try to keep major island groups in the same time zone. So some of these, especially in the ocean areas, you can see are a little bit different. That being said, this black line you can see in the center, that's our reference line for time differences, and it's called the Greenwich Meridian. And that's what we're going to count as our zero time. Anything to the right of this is ahead of time, ahead of the Greenwich Meridian. Anything behind this, so the Americas, they will be behind the Greenwich Meridian in terms of time. The easiest way to think about this is to think of it in terms of a number line, where Greenwich, we can count that as always being at 0. Anything to the right is positive time or ahead in time. You can notice that in the east coast of Australia here, we are 10 hours ahead of the Greenwich Meridian time. So we're going to be 10 hours ahead of any time in around London or mostly England. Anywhere in the Americas you can see they're behind or in the negative time area on this timeline. So we're going to use this principle here to work out the time difference between any two locations. So let's have a look at a few examples. So we're given here two locations, Berlin, and it's in a time zone +2, which what that means is that's 2 hours ahead of the Greenwich Meridian. Sydney is +10. What's the time difference between them? So we could use our time line and we could put those two locations on the timeline. Hopefully you can see that that's 8 hours apart. What strategy can we come up with mathematically to work that out each time? Well, I hope you can see if we take the larger number, the 10, and minus the smaller number, we can get that time difference. Let's look at a second example. So Spain is 1 hour ahead of the Greenwich Meridian. China is 6 hours ahead. If we just take this strategy of the larger number minus the smaller number, we can see that 6 minus 1 gives us a 5-hour time difference. I'm including the positive symbols here simply because some of the time zones, as you know, are going to be negative, and if this second one here was negative, this operation would give us two negatives, which would produce a positive result in the middle there. So on the timeline we can see that that's 1 hour and 6 hours or 5 hours apart. So those first two couple of pretty straightforward examples. Let's have a look at a slightly more difficult one. New York is in a time zone of -5, so it's 5 hours behind the Greenwich Meridian. Los Angeles is at -9. What's the time difference between? Now if we do the larger number minus the smaller number, we can see -5 minus -9, so this would become +9. It gives us a 4-hour time difference. Or if we look at use the time line, we can see that there's a 4-hour difference between -9 and -5. I hope from observation as well you can look at these two and using some common sense even think, okay, there's a 4-hour time zone time difference between these two locations. Last example, New York -5 and Moscow is +3. So one of them's to the left and one's to the right of the Greenwich Meridian. What's the time difference? Well, when you've got two times on opposite sides of the Greenwich Meridian, we could do the larger number minus the smaller number and get an 8-hour time difference. Another way to think about this is just adding the 3 hours back to the meridian and adding the 5 hours back to the meridian. 3 plus 5 is equal to 8. So you can use these time zones to work out the time difference between any two locations. You'll always be given these time zones. You won't have to remember them or figure them out. So now that we've got that, what is the local time in one location given the time in another? Well, once we know that time difference, all we need to know now is whether to add or subtract that to the time that we know our reference time. So how do we know whether to add that time difference or subtract it? Let's have a look at a couple of examples here. If I know the time somewhere on the left and I want to know the time of somewhere more to the right, we're always going to add time. If I'm trying to find the time somewhere in a positive direction, we're going to always add the time difference. If I know the time somewhere to the right and I want to know somewhere to the left, or if I'm just traveling from right to left in a negative direction along a timeline, you would subtract the time differences. So, in your maths notes, can you please pause the video and copy these 5 calculation steps down? Okay, once you've got those in, let's have a look at them. The 5 steps, we're going to draw a number line. Just a simple sketch. I'll show you in the examples how to do that. Place the two locations on your number line, and you'll probably want to label them maybe with the first letter of each of the cities. Part 3, calculate the time difference. So this first bit here is what we've already covered in the previous examples. Step 4, write down the local time next to that city. So whatever city you know the time, write that down. And then lastly, add or subtract the time difference you figured out in step 3 to the local time to work out the time in the location you want to find out. So let's put that into practice. So example 1 here. Patrick's working in Seoul and he's in a time zone of +9. He needs to travel to Chicago, which is at -6. We're going to work out 2 things. We're going to work out the time difference between the 2 locations, and then we're going to work out the local time in Chicago if it's 5 p.m. in Seoul. So we've been given this one here. We want to figure out the time in Chicago. So down here, first step, we're going to draw a number line. So just draw just a line. Put 0 in the middle as a reference, and then put these 2 locations on the number line. Now it doesn't have to be 100% to scale, as long as you put the positive numbers over the positive side and the negative numbers over the negative side. And I'm going to label them with S for Seoul and a C for Chicago. Now if we work out the time difference between these 2, we can see that they're on opposite sides of the meridian. So there's going to be 9 hours between Seoul and the meridian, 6 hours between Chicago and the meridian. So the time difference will be 9 hours plus 6 hours, which will give us a 15-hour time difference. So that's part 1 out of the way. Part 2, what is the local time in Chicago? Well, we know it's 5 p.m. in Seoul. So I'm doing step 4 here. I'm writing the time down next to the bit that we know. We want to know what the time is in Chicago. So we want to go in this direction, in the negative direction. So we're going to take away, or we're going to subtract the time difference from this time to get this new time. So 5 p.m, take away 15 hours. Probably a good strategy is to break that up. So 5 p.m, I can break this up into 12 plus whatever's left over, because using 5 p.m, take away 12 hours would get us back to 5 a.m, and then subtract a further 3 hours to get us to 2 a.m. So when it's 5 p.m. in Seoul, it's going to be 2 a.m. in Chicago. On to our second and last example. Moana is planning to trip from Suva in Fiji, that's at +12, to Florida at -5. So if we start off with our number line, Florida's at -5, we'll call that F, and Suva is at +12. What is the time difference between the cities? Well, first thing, just like the previous example, there's 12 hours between Suva and the Greenwich Meridian, and there's 5 hours between Florida. And so that, if we add those together, 5 plus 12 would give us 17-hour time difference. The second and last part, what is the time and day in Miami? So remember, that was our Florida. So what's the time over here if it's 10:10 a.m. in Suva? So if I put that over here, 10:10 a.m. in Suva, we want to know the time in this direction. So again, it's a negative time. So again, we're going to subtract our time difference. So we're going to subtract 17 hours. Let's make this easy and break it up. One lot of 12 plus the remainder. So that's 12. So let's write down here 10:10 a.m. If we subtract 12 hours from that, we should get back to 10:10 p.m. the previous night. So just take that in mind here. We're being told that this original time was Wednesday. Well, we're now back to Tuesday. So we've taken away our 12 hours. Now let's just take away the last 5 hours, and that should get us back to 5:10 p.m. on Tuesday. And it said that was the 6th of January, so that'll be Tuesday the 5th of January. In any question where they ever give you the day or the date, just make sure that you write that as well as the actual time. Okay, so to practice that, I've setting you 7 questions. They should be almost identical to these 2 example questions. They're on page 399, exercise 11E. It'll be attached to the post along with this video, questions 1 to 7. Good luck.